Welcome to the Gamer's Encyclopedia, an informative series detailing the histories of long-running or important series in gaming history. Well, last week I promised you a series that everybody plays and yet everybody bitches about, and while there's a few series out there that would be accurate for, none more so than Call of Duty. Call of Duty games are the Michael Bay films of video games. They're big, expensive, and just about everybody buys them and plays them, but at the same time, just about nobody will admit to enjoying them, even though they obviously do. It seems every 5 minutes there's an article about how to save the series, or why it's in trouble, or whatever other clever title they can come up with just to have an excuse to bitch about how it's the same thing every year. Yeah, well, so's your mom. Seriously, I don't need the comments about how bad you think COD is. The fact is, people who go on and on about how bad these games are preaching to the choir. It's not like they're going to convince people who like it that they should totally not like it. And you know what? I like it. I play these games, and I enjoy them. I can't for the life of me see what's so bad. And no, you don't need to explain to me what's so bad, because I already think you're wrong. And you know what? If you don't like the Call of Duty games, that kinda doesn't matter. I mean, so what? Play something else. Go play Battlefield while wearing socks with sandals for all I care. Well, here's hoping that by this point in the video, all the COD haters will have either left as they scramble towards the unsubscribe button or died of shock at finding out that I don't play retro games all the time. So let's talk about Call of Duty. The Call of Duty series has interesting roots, and in a lot of ways it all happened because of Steven Spielberg. After his World War II film Saving Private Ryan won all sorts of acclaim and made your grandpa cry, World War II was a hot ticket, and Spielberg came together with DreamWorks Interactive and Electronic Arts to create a PlayStation game based off of World War II, which he wrote the story for, which became Medal of Honor. Medal of Honor got a sequel, which was also on the PlayStation, also with Spielberg's involvement, and also developed by DreamWorks. However, for the third game, Medal of Honor Allied Assault, Spielberg enlisted the talents of a developer called 2015 Incorporated. If you're a Medal of Honor fan, you might know that one as the one that was only on PC, and the one that was probably the best one in the series. It was the last game in the series that Spielberg would work on, but just as Spielberg had parlayed his success with Saving Private Ryan into the Medal of Honor games, or at least the first three, a bunch of employees from 2015 Inc. decided that they could do it better and struck out on their own, forming their own company, Infinity Ward. Infinity Ward created the Call of Duty series and are the developer most associated with the series. However, with a yearly schedule to put out games that take more than a year to actually make, they have farmed out the Call of Duty games to other developers with varying degrees of success. So yes, the reason they come out every year is not because they're rushed, but because Infinity Ward alternates with other developers, usually Treyarch. So let's take a look at the first game in the series. Where's that stat card thingy? There we go. Call of Duty, or as it's called on the home consoles, Call of Duty Classic, was developed by Infinity Ward, excepting the N-Gage version, which was developed by Nokia, and most versions were published by Activision, though the Japanese version was published by MediaQuest, and the Mac version by Aspyr. It was directed by Ken Turner and produced by Vince Zampella. Call of Duty was released originally on PC in America on October 29, 2003, in Europe on November 7, 2003, and in Japan on November 18, 2003. The Steam version came out worldwide on October 13, 2006. The Mac version came out in America only in May of 2004. The N-Gage version, yes, I wasn't kidding, the original Call of Duty was on the N-Gage, was released in Europe on November 10, 2004, and in America on November 23, 2004. The Xbox 360 version was released worldwide on December 2, 2009, and the PlayStation 3 version was released in America on December 3, 2009, and in Europe on December 10, 2009. On game rankings, I'm going by the PC version, which has a 91.71, the third highest of the 19 games in the series ranked on there. Call of Duty takes place during World War II and has you play as American, British, and Soviet infantry in a campaign against the Axis forces. The game's story is told in 3 chapters. The first is the American chapter, which has you battling the German forces in northern France. The game then goes to the British chapter, which also takes place mostly in France, though it jumps around a bit, and introduces Captain Price, perhaps the closest thing the series has to a mascot. The third is the Soviet section, which has you actually invading Germany and eventually storming the Reichstag. It's the hardest part of the game, but easily my favorite section. What's interesting about the original Call of Duty is how much more it's like Medal of Honor than it's like Call of Duty. I mean, this started out the series, but it had a lot of early installment weirdness that was actually just normal gameplay tropes at the time, such as having to pick up health and being able to carry more than just 2 guns. If you played the early Medal of Honor games, this one will seem really familiar to you, though I think it's better, especially the soundtrack, which is top-notch. One thing to mention is that the original game did start one tradition, celebrity voice actors. If Sergeant Waters sounds familiar, it's because that's Jason Statham. Yeah. Next up would be not a sequel, but rather an expansion pack to the first game, which was basically more levels to play. Let's take a look. Call of Duty United Offensive was created by Grey Matter Interactive and published by Activision, though the Japanese version was once again published by MediaQuest. It was produced by Ken Turner. The original PC version was released in America on September 14, 2004, in Europe on September 24, 2004, and in Japan on October 9, 2004. The Steam version was released worldwide on October 13, 2006. This expansion pack was never released for any consoles. On Game Rankings, it has an 86.87, the 7th highest in the series. United Offensive is pretty long for an expansion pack, pretty much making it the second game in the series, though it uses the same engine. It had a different developer, and the story focuses less on famous battles than the original. Once again, the game is broken into American, British, and Soviet sections, although at the end there's one more level for each of the sections, told in a different order. One thing I can say is that this one is fucking hard. Seriously. It was recommended to me by a friend that whatever difficulty one would normally play on, you should lower it by 1. Something that I did not listen to. I played on hardened difficulty. I think most experienced FPS players play on hardened because it's challenging without being ridiculously frustrating, but I wasn't able to get through this one and I had to bring it down to regular. This one's insane. Other than that, I can't offer too much insight as I only played it once, so let's move on to the next game. Now, the first game and its expansion were great and all for PC, but at the time they were not available on consoles. For whatever reason, instead of releasing Call of Duty for the consoles of the day, Infinity Ward handed the series off to some other developers to make a console version of the game. The result is a game that is very much based on the original Call of Duty, but it has a different story and levels. It's sort of a side story game. So let's take a look. Call of Duty Finest Hour, which in Japan is simply called Call of Duty, which probably confused some people over there, was developed by Exact Entertainment for the GameCube and Spark Unlimited for PlayStation 2 and Xbox versions. It was published by Activision, though the Japanese version was published by Capcom. Yeah, put that in your pipe and smoke it. The GameCube version came out in America on November 16, 2004, and in Europe on November 26, 2004. The PlayStation 2 and Xbox versions came out in America on November 16, 2004, in Europe on December 2, 2004, and in Japan on October 27, 2005. For Game Rankings, the PlayStation 2 version has a 77.71, the 13th highest of the series. Finest Hour is basically the console equivalent of the first game, but it isn't the exact same game as it follows different characters at different battles. But it still follows the American, British, and Soviet forces, albeit giving more playable characters. There are actually 6 storylines instead of 3. Finest Hour is pretty good, but it isn't up to the standard of the PC titles. The graphics are kind of drab, and the game's engine seems to be chugging along at times. But it is worth playing if you're into World War II, as it is a decent story, and the music is once again excellent, as it was composed by the same fellow who did the first game and the early Medal of Honor games. Finest Hour also gives you another celebrity voice actor. This time Brian Johnson played Sergeant Starkey. Yeah, who's that? The singer from AC/DC. You'll never look at Starkey the same way again. So, it's just like video games for the one called 2 to be the 4th game. Yeah, let's take a look. Call of Duty 2 was developed by Infinity Ward, though Aspyr handled the Mac version, and it was published by Activision for the most part, though the Mac version was published by Aspyr, and the Xbox 360 released in Japan was published by Konami. Yeah, first Capcom, then Konami. Where's your god now? The original PC version was released in most of the world on October 25, 2005, and in Japan on March 24, 2006. The Xbox 360 version was released in America on November 22, 2005, in Europe on December 2, 2005, and in Japan on June 15, 2006. The mobile version of the game was released in America only on January 5, 2006, and the Mac version was released in America sometime in 2006, and in Europe on June 1, 2006. On Game Rankings, the Xbox 360 version has an 89.78, the 4th highest of the series. Personally, I think this one was a huge improvement over the first game in a lot of ways. I remember when I first played it, I was skeptical of the new system in which you did not see how much life you had, there were no health power-ups, and you simply had to let yourself heal over time. Yeah, this is normal for FPS games now, but back then it was considered crazy by a lot of people. I was struck by how visceral the game is, and impressed that for a World War II game, it didn't just stick to the same places like France and Germany, and gave us a taste of the combat in places like Egypt, Tunisia, and Russia. The graphics were greatly improved, and the game played smoother and more fluid. It does have very much the same format as the first game and its ilk, the format of the Russian, British, and American campaigns, though it gives you the opportunity to jump around a bit as opposed to playing through them straight. All in all, this is the first one that played like the modern games, and it's pretty decent. Call of Duty 2 didn't have any big-name celebrities' voices in it, but it did heavily mine cast members from Band of Brothers, a trick that would be repeated for the next game, so let's take a look at that. Call of Duty 2 Big Red One was developed by Treyarch and published by Activision, and had some of the Japanese releases being published by Konami. It was released for the PlayStation 2 in America on November 1st, 2005, in Europe on November 18th, 2005, and in Japan on June 29th, 2006. The GameCube and Xbox versions were released in America on November 1st, 2005, in Europe on November 18th, 2005, and in Japan on June 29th, 2006. On Game Rankings, the PlayStation 2 version has a ranking of 79.80, the 11th highest of the series. Big Red One is essentially the sequel to Finest Hour. Just as Finest Hour was the console companion to the first game, Big Red One was the console companion to the second game. Though Call of Duty 2 was released for Xbox 360, this was a chance for the previous generation of consoles to get in on the action. Out of all the Call of Duty games, this is probably the most unique one, as it doesn't jump around to different militaries. Instead, it focuses on the U.S. Army's 1st Infantry Division, nicknamed the Big Red One. It takes place in North Africa, France, and Germany, and has a military documentary-style storyline with narration by Mark Hamill, who interestingly enough in 1980 was in a World War II movie based on the same events, which was called The Big Red One. The game also, once again, mines cast members from Band of Brothers. Big Red One is kind of interesting, as it's probably one of the most overlooked games in the series by fans of the series, but it's the one game I hear the COD haters saying nice things about. Weird, eh? This was the first time that Treyarch would develop a Call of Duty game, and although it wasn't one of the big successful ones, it did pave way for those, and Treyarch would also handle the next main game in the series. Let's take a look at that one. Call of Duty 3 was developed by Treyarch, though the Wii version was handled by Exact, and it was published by Activision, though Spike handled the Japanese releases. It was released for the Xbox 360 in America on November 7, 2006, in Europe on November 10, 2006, in Australia on November 15, 2006, and in Japan on March 29, 2007. The original Xbox version was released in America on November 7, 2006, in Europe on November 10, 2006, and in Australia on November 22, 2006. The PlayStation 2 version was released in America on November 7, 2006, in Australia on November 22, 2006, and in Europe on November 24, 2006. The Wii version was released in America on November 14, 2006, in Australia on December 6, 2006, and in Europe on December 8, 2006. Finally, the PlayStation 3 version was released in America on November 14, 2006, in Europe and Australia on March 23, 2007, and in Japan on June 14, 2007. On Game Rankings, the original Xbox version of the game has an 82.73, the 10th highest of the series. Call of Duty 3 was once again another Treyarch game, but this time it went more traditional in portraying differing militaries. This time having an American campaign, a British and French campaign, a Canadian campaign, and a Polish campaign. As far as I know, it's the only major video game where you play as Canadian military. This one, however, is slightly confusing. You see, the thing is, you might have noticed that it was released for Xbox 360, Xbox, Wii, PlayStation 2, and PlayStation 3, but not for PC. It's the only game in the main series to not ever have seen a release on PC, which I find to be odd. For this reason, a lot of people lump it in with Finest Hour and Big Red One as the console-exclusive games, though it is a main game in the series, and it has a companion game of its own, which I'll be getting to next. This is also the only main game in the series I've never played, mostly because it was never released for PC. I keep telling myself if I ever see it in a store for either 360, PlayStation 2, or Wii to pick it up. It certainly is cheap enough, but I always either forget to, or I just don't feel like looking for it, or when I do, it's not around. Some people have told me this is a pretty good one, and some people have told me it's the worst game in the series, with a lack of good set pieces and boring protagonists and voice actors straight from the C-list. So I kind of feel I'm not exactly missing out. Yeah, so let's move on. Like the first two main entries, 3 got its own companion game, though as 3 was all over the consoles already and didn't have a PC version, this time the companion game was for a handheld. Let's take a look. Call of Duty Roads to Victory, known in Australia as Call of Duty 3, was developed by Amaze Entertainment and published by Activision. It was released for PlayStation Portable in America on March 13, 2007, and in Europe and Australia on March 30, 2007. On Game Rankings, it has a score of 64.65, the 17th highest in the series and the 3rd lowest. Well, this was the first handheld Call of Duty game, and well, the series really isn't meant to be played on handhelds. You'll notice the lowest scoring ones are mostly the handheld games. One thing you'll notice is, as I mentioned, it's called Call of Duty 3 in Australia, and normally I don't show Australian box art since it's almost always exactly the same as European box art, but I wanted to here because it's different, and the game wasn't released in Japan, so I had space. What makes this confusing is that not only is it called Call of Duty 3 there, but the box art is so similar to Call of Duty 3's box art that you really have to care to see the difference. It's nearly identical. So an Australian customer may have seen this and assumed that it was the same as the console version, not knowing that it's a completely different game. I don't have much to say, personally, as I haven't played it, so let's just move on. Well, as you guys know, I once did a Clearing Confusion episode about the series, highlighting the different series and how it can be confusing, and though that was a good episode, I didn't know as much then as I do now about the games, and having played the majority of them, I've come to realize that the series is made up out of 4 distinctive trilogies. The first would be Call of Duty 1, 2, and 3, the World War II trilogy. The second would be made up out of Finest Hour, Big Red One, and Roads to Victory, the Companion Games trilogy. The next game would start up a new series, completely leaving World War II behind, and of course, I'm talking about Modern Warfare. Let's take a look. Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, the Wii version adds Reflex Edition to the title, was developed by Infinity Ward, the Mac version being done by Aspyr, and the Wii version by Treyarch and published by Activision, with some of the Japanese releases being published by Square Enix. Yeah, you heard me right. It was directed by Mackie McCandlish. The Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, and PC versions all had simultaneous releases, so let's handle these together. Those were released in America on November 5, 2007, in Australia on November 7, 2007, in Europe on November 9, 2007, in Japan on December 27, 2007, and then it was re-released again in Japan on September 10, 2009. That was the Square Enix one. The Mac version was released in America on September 26, 2008, and in Australia on January 28, 2011. The Wii version, the one called Reflex Edition, was released worldwide on November 10, 2009. On Game Rankings, we're going by the Xbox 360 version, which has a 94.16, the highest of the series. Modern Warfare takes the series into obviously modern combat with a new storyline. Basically, the Middle East is being held in the grip of a terrorist named Al-Assad, who is taking over countries and executing presidents on live TV. The U.S. Marine Corps goes after him directly by invading, while the British go after the intelligence on his methods and where he gets his weapons. The Marines suffer heavy losses after they chase him down and find Al-Assad missing, and then are caught in a blast of a nuclear device, while the British SAS team captures him elsewhere and finds out that he's the puppet of a Russian ultranationalist named Zakhaev, who was trying to take over Russia while distracting the rest of the world with the Middle Eastern conflict by arming terrorists. The game introduces some pretty memorable characters, some of which, like Price and Soap, would go on to appear in the sequels, while others, die horribly. My personal experience with the game is wondering why the hell they just didn't call it Modern Warfare like they originally wanted to, and not call it Call of Duty 4, but, well, I went over that in Clearing Confusion, but then not caring because this game is really, really good. The game had a big-budget Hollywood movie-type of feel to it, even though for once they didn't use any big-name voice actors, mining talent from typical video game voice actors. Yeah, the guy who plays Price is named Bill Murray, but it's not like the same guy. I mean, you can't have thought that was that Bill Murray. Just like the guy named Gordon Ramsay, who is in the anime Star Blazers. It's not the Gordon Ramsay that cooks and yells, it's just a guy with the same name. Yeah. Anyway, Modern Warfare was a huge success and pretty much kicked off the modern era of Call of Duty games. And from then on, Infinity Ward would release a game every other year, with Treyarch handling the off years with their own new series, making Infinity Ward and Treyarch synonymous with the series, although other developers would handle more companion games. Oh yeah, we still got more of those, though now they're strictly the handheld games that mostly have the same names as their big brothers, but usually are different games. Let's take a look at one of those now. Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare shares its name with its PC and console counterpart, but this one's for the DS. It was developed by N-Space and published by Activision. It was released for the DS in America on November 5th, 2007, in Australia on November 7th, 2007, in Europe on November 9th, 2007, in Korea on January 25th, 2008, and in Japan on March 26, 2008. On game rankings, it has a score of 75.81, the 15th highest in the series. This is basically a completely different game, the plot taking place simultaneously to the main game, but telling different events. Basically, the characters in this one are fighting the same war, but instead of the main battles against the primary villains, it portrays lesser battles that support the war effort. Other than that, not a whole lot to say, so let's move on. Next up, Infinity Ward would hand this series back to Treyarch for them to start their own storyline, which would start with a World War II game and eventually move forward into other wars and then on into the future. This next one has not one, but two supporting side games, one for the DS and another for PS2. But what's interesting is, in this case, the PlayStation 2 side game actually came out first, by a day. And since on the Gamer's Encyclopedia I go strictly by release order, I'm going to take a look at that one first. Call of Duty World at War Final Fronts was developed by Rebellion Developments and published by Activision. It was released for the PlayStation 2 in America on November 10, 2008, in Australia on November 12, 2008, and in Europe on November 14, 2008. This one never made it to Japan. On game rankings, it has a score of 67.50, the 16th highest of the series. World at War in general brings the series back to World War II, but instead of focusing on combat in Europe or Africa against Nazis, it focuses a lot on the battles of the South Pacific against Japanese forces. Yeah, that's probably why they didn't come out in Japan. Anyway, Final Fronts is a side game that focuses on several battles with 4 campaigns: War in the Pacific, Winter Offensive, Victory in Europe, and Victory in the Pacific. And you play as both British and American forces. Not much to say, as I haven't played this one, and it doesn't add to the overall plot of the series. One thing to mention is that this one notoriously does not have online multiplayer, something that the series is known for. Personally, I could give a flying crap about online multiplayer. I never play it like that, but it's worth mentioning as an anomaly. While this one was good for people who only had PlayStation 2, it really paled in comparison to its bigger brother, which came out a day later. The other side game, the DS game, also came out the same day as the main game, but let's look at the main one first. Call of Duty World at War was developed by Treyarch, though Exact handled the Wii version. It was published by Activision Blizzard, and it was directed by Cesar Statsny and produced by Daniel Hunting, Marfwan Aberzad, I don't know how to say that, and John M. Dehart. It was released for PC, PlayStation 3, mobile phones, and Xbox 360 in America on November 11, 2008, in Australia on November 12, 2008, and in Europe on November 14, 2008. The Wii version was released in America on November 11, 2008, in Europe on November 14, 2009, and in Australia on November 26, 2008. On game rankings, the Xbox 360 version has a ranking of 85.57, the 9th highest in the series. In World at War, you're fighting as an American soldier in the South Pacific fighting against Japanese forces, and a Soviet soldier pushing from Moscow towards Berlin in the final rush for the Reichstag, sort of like the first Call of Duty. The American campaign is interesting because of the differing techniques needed to defeat the Japanese military, but the Soviet sections of the game are way better due to the interesting story. You're playing as Dmitry Petrenko, a skilled soldier who was left for dead after a fierce battle, and you're paired with a single-minded soldier named Viktor Reznov, played brilliantly by Gary Oldman, who is absolute in his hatred of the German Nazis. He's a character completely without any mercy. The American sections are more straightforward battling, though the performance of Kiefer Sutherland as Sergeant Roebuck keeps it interesting. My only problem with this one was more gameplay-oriented. It seemed kind of clunky, and I found myself getting caught on scenery a lot. The controls just overall were a bit of a step down from Modern Warfare, and this one was a hell of a lot harder due to the issues that I had with the controls. But more of the characters and the set pieces kept me coming back for more. Overall, it's not one of the best, but it's pretty good. Just like Modern Warfare, there was also a DS version, so let's take a look at that. The DS version of Call of Duty World at War was developed by N-Space and published by Activision. It was released for the DS in America on November 11, 2008, in Europe on November 14, 2008, and in Australia on November 26, 2008. None of the versions of World at War have ever been released in Japan. On game rankings, this one has a 77.83, the 12th highest of the series. This game is kind of interesting because it's like the DS version of Modern Warfare in the sense that it offers a different perspective, but in this case, it's the same battles and locations as its big brother, just you're playing as different characters who did different things in those battles. It kind of reminds me of the concept behind something like Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time Master Quest. You go to the same locations, but you do things differently. Next up, it would be back to Infinity Ward for their next big thing, so let's take a look at that. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 is developed by Infinity Ward and published by Activision, and by Square Enix in Japan. It was directed by Jason West and produced by Mark Rubin. It was released for PC internationally on November 10, 2009, and in Japan on December 23, 2009. The PlayStation 3 version came out in America, Europe, and Australia on November 10, 2009, in Korea on November 11, 2009, and in Japan on December 10, 2009. The PlayStation 3 download version for PlayStation Network had a different release. That came out in America on November 29, 2011, and in Europe on December 7, 2011. The Xbox 360 version came out worldwide on November 12, 2009. On game rankings, this one has a score of 93.57, the second highest of the series. So how do you do a sequel to Modern Warfare? I mean, everything was wrapped up, right? Zakhaev is dead, the ultranationalists were defeated by the Russian military, and peace seems to have returned, nuclear annihilation averted. But flash forward a year and the ultranationalist party, now run by a skeevy asshole named Makarov, yes, he's named after a gun, and they've all but taken over Russia, elevating Zakhaev to martyr status. The game starts with an American soldier being picked by a high-ranking general named Shepard. He's the obligatory celebrity voice, by the way, that's Lance Henriksen. Anyway, this guy gets put into deep cover within Makarov's operation and told to get as close as he can and report back. After Makarov shoots up an airport, killing hundreds of Russian civilians, he reveals he knew the soldier was an American plant, and he kills him. His body ties the Americans into Makarov and the massacre, prompting a war between the United States and Russia. At the same time as you play as American soldiers fighting against the Russian invasion, you also play as the British SAS agents attempting to undermine Makarov's operation. I won't spoil the rest of the game. You should play this one yourself, but it has some pretty cool twists and it ends with a cliffhanger. So you know there's going to be another one. Modern Warfare 2 is interesting to me because I was immediately irritated at some of the gameplay changes, most notably the inability to lean around corners, which was really important in the first game, though I got used to it, and it plays more like old-school shooter than a modern one in that sense. Since you can't hide and peek out, you gotta run out and shoot shit yourself. The story was really interesting, possibly more so than the first game, but I preferred the gameplay in the first one, so it's kind of a toss-up between the two. Like its predecessor, Modern Warfare 2 had a DS game associated with it, so let's take a look at that one. Call of Duty Modern Warfare Mobilized was developed by N-Space and published by Activision. It was released in America, Australia, and Europe on November 10, 2009. On game rankings, it has a 74.50, the 15th highest of the series. This one is interesting because by the title, it sounds like it's either connected to the first Modern Warfare game or it's a spin-off that's only using the name, but it has an identical box art to the second game. This game is another companion piece that offers a different narrative in the Modern Warfare universe. In this case, you're trying to prevent a deposed ruler from building and using a nuclear device against the ultranationalist party. Timeline-wise, this one actually takes place a few years after Modern Warfare 2. This is one of the better handheld COD games, though still, this is a series that I say, release it on PC or go home. So let's move on to the next big release, and my personal favorite. Call of Duty Black Ops was developed by Treyarch. The DS version was handled by N-Space and published by Activision, with Square Enix again handling the Japanese releases. And it was directed by Dave Anthony. It was released for PC, PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, Wii, DS, and Mac internationally on November 9, 2010, and then in Japan on November 19, 2010, and later on December 16, 2010. The first version was subtitled, while the second had dubbed Japanese voices. On game rankings, I'm going by the PlayStation 3 version, which has an 88.36, the sixth highest of the series. Black Ops is essentially a sequel to World at War, but you won't necessarily know that right away. The game takes place in the 1960s. You're Alex Mason, who's being interrogated by unknown agents about his activities in the past 7 years, in which he was a Black Ops military agent who was involved with the Bay of Pigs and the Vietnam War. The connection to World at War is that Mason spent time in a Russian gulag with Viktor Reznov from World at War, who tells him his own story, and they become close friends. The game is full of double talk and brainwashing and hallucinations. By the end, you'll be seriously questioning what you clearly see right before you, as Mason goes on a spree of revenge against a Russian traitor and a Nazi scientist who are making a deadly gas called Nova 6. If I say any more, I'll spoil it, but it's mostly due to the plot that I like this one the best. The gameplay is also great, a huge improvement over World at War. Honestly, it plays more like Modern Warfare in its controls, though I think this one's even better, as I found myself dodging around and killing things easier in this one. Black Ops did get some backlash for its deep storyline and confusing narrative that jumps all over the place, but this kind of shit is the reason I play it. Hell, in the Vietnam missions, I kind of imagine my dad doing shit like this, although he wasn't quite that hardcore, he was recon. Anyway, Black Ops was a huge success and showed that Treyarch could be just as good as Infinity Ward, which is cool because their first few efforts weren't really special, and while World at War was good, it didn't have enough polish in my opinion. This one, though? They've yet to top it. Black Ops also has a big cast with a lot of big names. Gary Oldman returned as Reznov with other big names rounding out the cast, such as Ed Harris, Sam Worthington, and Ice Cube. Anyway, you might notice that I included the DS version. This is because it doesn't tell a different story, but rather adapts the same story, so I consider it to be the same game, albeit a very watered-down version. There was a mobile version that was different, but there's not much info that I can find, and I decided not to give it its own entry, as other than the gameplay and storyline, it shares almost everything else, such as release dates. So for the sake of sanity, I'm moving on. If you knew it was coming, here it is. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 was developed by Infinity Ward with Sledgehammer Games, with Treyarch handling the Wii version, while it was published by Activision and Square Enix in Japan. It was directed by Steve Akerich and produced by Mark Rubin. It was released for PC, PlayStation 3, and Xbox 360 internationally on November 8, 2011, and in Japan on November 17, 2011 for the sub version, and December 22, 2011 for the dubbed version. The Wii version was released in America on November 8, 2011, in Europe on November 11, 2011, and in Australia on November 23, 2011. On game rankings, the Xbox 360 version has an 88.46, the fifth highest of the series. Modern Warfare 3 continues where 2 left off. The Russian invasion of America has blossomed into the Third World War, and American military is trying their hardest to push it back the onslaught while also trying to re-enter diplomatic channels with Russia. The ultranationalists are putting pressure on the Russian president to continue the war, and they do so by attacking his plane and kidnapping his daughter. Soap and Price were disavowed as traitorous by the United Kingdom government after the events of the last game where they killed General Shepard, and they have to work behind the scenes to bring down Makarov once and for all. This one started out kinda disappointing, but the second half of the game was good enough to save it in my eyes. It's definitely the weak point of the Modern Warfare trilogy, mostly for its slow start, but it makes up for lost time as the entire thing ramps up to its conclusion. My only problem with the gameplay was that Black Ops once again got me used to being able to lean, and Modern Warfare 3 takes that away completely again, and the last level is disproportionately much harder than the rest of the game. And at least for me, it tended to save in weird spots where I was being shot up and I would have to either go back to a previous save or do really quick moves every time I reloaded. Overall, a great game, it just takes a while to get going. The voice cast was mostly the same as the last game, though Timothy Olyphant was added as the character Grinch. There was once again a handheld version, this time going back to being a different game, so let's take a look at that. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 Defiance was developed by N-Space and published by Activision. It was released for the DS in America, Europe, and Australia on November 8, 2011. On game rankings, it has a score of 58.75, the second lowest of the series. I never played this one, and from all accounts I'm not missing out, but it's pretty interesting that it actually takes place between 2 and 3 and not at the same time as 3. Halfway through 2 is when the invasion began, and the events of Defiance deal with the American military fighting back against the Russian invaders, while basically not bothering with the overall plot of the trilogy. Not much to say here, so moving along. Next up is the one that got everyone all excited with the trailer promising a futuristic setting. Yep, it's time for Black Ops 2. Let's take a look. Call of Duty Black Ops 2 was developed by Treyarch and published by Activision, with Square Enix yet again doing the Japanese version, and it was directed by David Anthony. It was released for PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, and PC internationally on November 12, 2012, and in Japan with subtitles on November 22, 2012, and with dubbed voices on December 20, 2012. The Wii U version was released in America on November 18, 2012, in Europe and Australia on November 30, 2012, and in Japan on December 20, 2012. On Game Rankings, the Wii U version has an 86.07, 8th highest of the series. Black Ops 2. Yes, it takes place in the future, but it also heavily uses flashbacks to as far back as the 80s. In the year 2025, you are Alex Mason's son David Mason, who has become a Navy SEAL and is dealing with the most dangerous terrorist since Osama bin Laden, Raul Menendez, who has been raising a huge organization called Cortes DA and rallying support all over the globe, giving the appearance of being a hero to the world while enacting a plan to gain control of U.S. government drones and use them to facilitate a war between America and China. Or at least that's what it seems like. Just like Black Ops, this one is full of misinformation and all sorts of crazy doublespeak and whatnot. Though it's not as cerebral as the first one, it does have a pretty tight plot. What makes Black Ops 2 interesting is the many ways in which you make choices, oftentimes without realizing that you're making a choice at all, which impacts the overall plot and which ending you get. And there are 5 endings ranging from awesome, we beat the bad guys, to oh god, what just happened, I'm going to eat a bullet. The game also features Strike Force missions, which are optional, and instead of controlling a main character in a direct plot-driven levels, you control an entire squad of either Navy SEALs, drones, or a mixture of the two, in a bizarre mixture of FPS, RTS, and tower defense. At first, I didn't like these levels. Though they almost seemed custom-made for the Wii U and its tablet, I play on PC, and I found them annoying, though eventually I got the hang of it. And you pretty much gotta do them to get the best ending. And yes, I got one of the bad endings the first time, and I felt morally obligated to play the entire game all over again and do it right. And I gotta say, it was worth it. Overall, this one isn't my favorite, Black Ops 2 still is, but it's a hell of a lot of fun. Just don't get attached to any of the characters and always explore other avenues. The voice cast is once again impressive, with a lot of the cast from Black Ops 1 returning, though Michael Keaton takes over the role previously done by Ed Harris, and Michelle Rodriguez also joins the cast. Black Ops 2 also had its handheld companion game, though this time it was kind of a disaster. Yeah, let's take a look at that one. Call of Duty Black Ops Declassified was developed by Instigate Games and published by Activision. Square Enix once again did the Japanese version. It was released for the Vita internationally on November 13th, 2012, and in Japan on December 20th, 2012. On Game Rankings, ouch, it has a 33.21, by far the lowest of the series. I was actually interested in this one until I actually saw it, and yeah, it's not good. This one pretty much can be ignored. At times, the Call of Duty series has been accused of being a life support system for the multiplayer, and I find that to be unfair, as I've always been quite happy with the single-player experiences that Infinity Ward and Treyarch have given us, and it's clear that a shitload of work goes into them. Yes, some people claim the games are short and the multiplayer is therefore 90% of the game, but I'm not exactly sure how long they expect an FPS to be. By their very nature, they're not really long games, but this? Black Ops Declassified is a multiplayer game that just happens to have some single-player missions. Pretty much no plot at all, just some objectives that dubiously take place between the Black Ops games, but don't actually matter. And the game itself, really flawed. The less said about this one, the better. Well, that's the entire series to date. The popularity of the series continues to grow, as does the animosity from the COD haters out there, but, I say let 'em bitch. They could be doing literally anything else, such as playing whatever games they do like, but instead they choose to whine. Don't get me wrong, you're allowed not to like these games, I just don't get why people feel the need to talk about it so much. Look at any video of anything related to Call of Duty on YouTube, and then look at the comments, and all you'll see is people who aren't fans, but just came by to leave a nasty comment. What's the point? There is another game planned to come out later this year from Infinity Ward called Call of Duty Ghosts, starting a completely new storyline. But seeing as how I'm only covering released games, I'm going to end it here. Join me next week for a series of RPGs that is almost impossible to put in order without looking it up. But I've already done it for you. See you then.